welcome to New York Buddha Dharma. And tonight we're going to be talking about the refuge vow. And there are a number of people in this room who are going to take refuge. And there's some others who are going to be listening to this talk online who are going to be coming for the refuge vow as well. So I think I sent out the reading to the refugees, yeah? Term Rinpoche called us refugees. And the purpose of taking refuge is to awaken from confusion and to associate oneself with wakefulness. We're committing ourselves to a path of freedom. Freedom from what? From struggle. The struggle of constantly trying to improve ourselves, improve our situations. The struggle of self-aggrandizement. The struggle of constantly judging our lives as good, bad, could be better. So that we're constantly find ourselves in a forward lean in pursuit of some imagined goal. And where freedom lies, of course, is in shifting our loyalty, our allegiance from that forward lean away from the past towards the future, shifting our loyalty to the present, in which those dreams of the past and the future, which are riddled with hope and fear and anxiety, evaporate in awareness of this present moment. So the act of meditation is constantly to come back to the present. We practice it. We find ourselves lost in thought. We realize that. We acknowledge it. Just by seeing it, you don't even have to do anything. As soon as you realize that you're dreaming, well, you're not. Just like in the morning when you wake up from a dream and you say, oh, I had a dream. Well, you're not dreaming anymore. Same thing with our waking dreams. And the act of meditation is constantly acknowledging that, and then we're back. We're back in the awareness of the present moment. I read, I actually saw a wonderful clip of a teacher I like. His name is Organ Chowang, and he wrote the book that I plug now and then called Our Pristine Mind. And he said, sometimes people think that they're failures at meditation because they can't abide, in this awareness all the time. But actually, if you could abide in that awareness all the time, that's not meditation. That's abiding in awareness all the time. Meditation is the constant act of recognizing that one has drifted off into a dream of the past or the future, and then coming back. That's the practice, and that's what meditation is. And so there are different techniques for accomplishing this, but all of them revolve around that basic point of seeing that one is lost in dream and coming back. And when you take refuge, you're really making a commitment to yourself to do this. And we're giving up as well, when you take refuge, you're giving up shopping for a better way, a better path. That very act of shopping is another form of sort of self-torture. It's another form of self-aggrandizement. That one is constantly looking for a better way. And that's antithetical to coming back and resting in the present. So sooner or later, if you're digging a lot of shallow holes, kind of trying different disciplines, you commit. You commit to digging one deep one. And in this case, we're committing ourselves to the path that the Buddha laid out for us 2,600 years ago, and which has been handed down from one person to the next over all these years. And there are many analogies for the way it's handed down. One of the ones I like is that it's like a candle being passed on, a lit candle. And the last person who's holding this lit candle, the teacher, reaches over and lights the candle of the student. And the student turns around and lights the candle of the next person, and the flame is passed from generation to generation, a constantly lit flame. Trungpa Rinpoche said that it's like eating fresh baked bread. It has to be baked fresh every time. And that bread is baked by the teacher and given to the student, and the student has to eat it while it's still hot. So, he says, we take a definite vow to enter a discipline of choicelessness. See, the choice is always thinking, well, this might be better than that. Which choice shall I make? Which is one that's going to give me the most improvement? But when you come back to the present moment, there's no choice. It's just this, right now, awake, present. So you're giving up that whole choicefulness, and you're coming back to choicelessness. And he calls it becoming a refugee. And we're giving up any attachment to basic security, which is really quite something. This is a commitment to being alone and to loneliness, and not trying to constantly sort of find company to buttress our sense of aloneness. So this whole path is a path of people, a group of people who have committed to taking the refuge vow, committing to aloneness together and treading the path together alone. He says, there's actually no solid basis for security in one's life. Boy, is that ever true. And I can see some smiles of recognition here. It's like you think you've got it made at some point, like things are secure, like locked up, and now everything's good, and then the rug gets pulled out from under you once again. He says, so becoming a refugee is acknowledging that we are homeless and groundless. It is acknowledging that there is really no need for home or ground. Taking refuge is an expression of freedom, because as refugees, we are no longer bounded by the need for security. Wow. That's a beaut. That's something to take in. We are suspended in no man's land, in which the only thing to do is to relate with the teachings and ourselves. I mean, we think we found a little home, a nest, and we know where north, south, east, and west are. And then the rug gets pulled out. I keep thinking of the Galaxy song, Eric Idle. The universe keeps on expanding and expanding in all of the directions it can whiz, as fast as it can go, the speed of light, 12 million miles a minute, and that's the fastest speed there is. So remember when you're feeling very small and insecure, how amazingly unlikely is your birth, and pray that there is intelligent life somewhere out in space, because it's bugger all down here on Earth. Yeah. But I mean, it's like no reference points. There's that tagline I love that I keep quoting that appeared on a bunch of people's emails. A quote from Trungpa Rinpoche. He said, the bad news is we're falling through centerless space. The good news is there is no ground. And this means that we're much more open. We're giving up our biases, our prejudices, the axes we have to grind, which are always about self-improvement, self-aggrandizement. Yeah. And the refuge ceremony represents a final decision, that this is the path you're going to take. This path started in the present yuga. Yuga is like an age, right? We're in the Kali Yuga, with the Buddha, 2,600 years ago. And it's been passed down, as I said, And there are many, many lineages that sprang up. After the Buddha passed away and achieved parinirvana, the Sangha fractured. As often happens after a teacher dies, people disagree on what that teacher said. And the period immediately after the Buddha's death was called the period of the 18 schools. Many of those schools are lost. In fact, the only 3 really that remain are the Theravada in Southeast Asia. Around 250 BC, there was a school in India called the Sthaviravada. Sthavira is Sanskrit. It means, Vada means doctrine, Sthavira means elders. So it was the doctrine of the elders. And it migrated south to Ceylon, and then from Ceylon into Southeast Asia. In Ceylon, it was translated into Pali, and that's where Theravada comes from, because Thera is the Pali for Sthavira, which is Sanskrit. Another school was called the Sarvastivada, the doctrine of everything. Sarva means everything. And that school went north into Tibet and became part of the Tantric path. It became the basis for the first stage of the Tantric path, Buddhism, which is the Hinayana path, the lesser vehicle it's called, or the foundational vehicle. And then there was a group called the Mahasangikas, that means greater Sangha. And they came up with some radically new ideas, the idea of the Bodhisattva and of Shunyata. And they evolved into what is now the Mahayana, which went to China, Korea, Japan, Vietnam, and a few other places in Southeast Asia. And it also went to Tibet, along with, and then the third wasn't one of the 18 schools, but much later was the path of Tantra. And that developed probably in the first 8 or so centuries AD in the forests of India with wild yogis. And then it was incorporated into the rest of Buddhism in the great universities. And then in the 11th century, it disappeared from India with the Muslim invasion. But before that, it had already migrated to Tibet. So this tradition that we're a part of, that we're aligning ourselves with, goes through all these different streams back to the seminal font, who was the Buddha himself. So when we take refuge, the basic formula is that we're taking refuge in the Buddha as an example of someone who achieved enlightenment, who is an ordinary human being like us, and who did it, and can be our inspiration and our example. We take refuge in the Dharma as the path, the teachings which lay out the path. And we take refuge in the Sangha as the community of fellow practitioners, fellow people who are treading the path, and we tread that path alone together. So he said that the ceremony, which we're all going to do in about 3 weeks, marks the beginning of an odyssey of loneliness. That's really interesting. And aloneness. He says, finally you become a real person, standing on your own feet. Each one of us has to do it all, him or herself. We have to work with the sense of sacredness and richness and the magical aspect of our experience on an extremely personal level. That sacredness, that magical aspect, is what comes through when we begin to cut through the neurosis of egotism, of being lost in the past and future. When we begin to come through into awareness and open our eyes to the beauty and the vividness of this world and the power of this world. And then the world emerges as what they call sacred world. And sacred world is not holy in some book sense, like a Bible sense or anything like that. It's sacred because it's fundamentally of value, fundamentally worth being here for. And when we were doing the sound check tonight, I recited a part of a favorite poem of mine, Wordsworth's Intimations of Immortality on Reflections of Early Childhood. And I'll just give you the first stanza of this. He says, there was a time when meadow, grove, and stream, the earth, and every common sight to me did seem apparelled in celestial light, the glory and the freshness of a dream. He's talking about childhood. It is not now as it hath been of yore. Turn wheresoe'er I may, by night or day, the things which I have seen, I now can see no more. Because as we grow old, and as our egos develop, and conceptualization proliferates, it's like a fog. We walk down the streets in a fog of thought. And the world is literally grayed out, just as though we had sunglasses on. And when we begin to practice more, we are beginning to take those sunglasses off. If you go and do an intensive practice for a week, 2 weeks, you can do a month-long practice. We call it daton, where you're sitting with a group for a month. You can go into solitary retreat and practice a minimum in solitary retreat, 8 hours a day. And when you begin to do that, then those sunglasses really begin to come off, and the world begins to brighten. He says, by taking refuge, you receive the Buddhist heritage into your system. You join that particular wisdom that has existed for 2,600 years without interruption and without corruption. It's really interesting. So we take refuge in the Buddha as an example. And the important thing about the Buddha is that he's not some divine savior. Somebody who's going to, if we subscribe to him, if we pledge our loyalty to him, who's going to save us in some way, who's going to do it for us, take us under his arm. He's simply another human being who saw that there is tremendous suffering in this world and who set out to find a solution to it, an answer to it. And he left everything behind. He pursued a path of loneliness. And for years, 7 years, he tried every different thing, all kinds of yogic practices. He joined a bunch of yogis, all kinds of spiritually materialistic path. That means using spirituality to some form of self-aggrandizement, boosting his own ego. And he performed mortification of the flesh, hung upside down, starved himself, became skeletal, and did all kinds of different practices, and none of it worked. And finally, he sat down and he found the way, which is to examine his own mind and to see the difference between dream of the past and the future and awareness in the present moment. So he's an example of someone we can emulate. Taking refuge in the Buddha is realizing that our case history is in fact completely comparable to his. We're on this same kind of journey, leaving our home. Maybe we're not actually physically leaving our homes, but we're leaving that comfortable mindset that we developed through childhood, which became habitual, which led us into all kinds of neurotic and unhappy states of mind and activities. And we're renouncing that. We're coming back to very simple awareness in the present moment, to valuing this life as it arises now. Taking refuge in the Dharma as the path. This is a really interesting one. These teachings represent a constant process for us of learning and discovery. That is what is constantly going on as we tread the path. And as you study these teachings, I read these things over and over again. Every time I read them, I feel like I've never seen them before. It's like a new message. It's because it keeps deepening. It keeps hitting me, and I think all of us, in new ways, finding new ways into us. And it says the Dharma is also, this is a classic slogan, the Dharma is passionless. What that means is this. Here's an example of me falling away from that, losing my mind. I went with my daughter to buy a guitar for her. She wants an electric guitar. And we went to a music store. This was a few days ago. And she had already been there a lot of times and kind of knew what she wanted, but we went there and she was looking through different guitars. Now, meanwhile, there was a 6-year-old child banging away on the drums. There was a guy who was going through blues riffs at high volume, and another guy going through sort of rock riffs. The cacophony was just intense. Finally, I couldn't stand it anymore. I said, I'm leaving. I'm going out into the street. And I left her in there to look at guitars. And I went on the street and I thought, whoosh, like that. That's what you give up. When you say the Dharma is passionless, what you're doing is every situation, however painful or pleasurable it might be, is a learning situation. Now, that doesn't mean you torture yourself unnecessarily, but you don't reject what is painful out of hand. You look at it and you think, how can I learn from this? What's interesting about this? This person who's bothering me. Say you've got an enemy. Most people have enemies. Any saints in here who don't have enemies? No hands are going up. You got an enemy, and you think of that person, you go, you just want to strangle them, you want to get away from them, you want to get even with them, Dzongsa Khyentse Rinpoche is a wonderful teacher. He says, if you want to locate your sense of egotism, think of how you've been wronged. So, really what the Dharma is about is beginning to take every situation and say, look at this. How can I learn from it? What is this teaching me about my neurosis, my sanity, and how to be a better Buddha? So that's a hard lesson. That's a tough one. He says, passionlessness cuts through this small, goal-oriented ambition so that everything becomes purely a learning process. We are able to relate to our lives fully and properly. And this is really almost a description of the way in Buddhism they describe the enlightened state of mind. The enlightened person is constantly learning, constantly sees the world through a lens of curiosity and delight, is constantly exploring instead of being goal-oriented and looking for entertainment. Nothing is seen, and this is in the Dharma, as resentment, as a punishment, or as a cause for resentment or complaint. And we give up blame and its corollary, resentment. That's a good one. Giving up blame and its corollary, resentment. We stop dividing the world into friend and enemy and see it as a constant opportunity for relating. This is all part of what it means to begin to immerse oneself more and more in the Dharma and in awareness, meditation, meditative awareness. He says that passionlessness, giving up that complaint, that blame, is an expression of freedom. Wow. Freedom from blame. Blame is constantly enslaving us to its purposes, to its ends. And then he says, this means that we face and experience the pain and pleasure very directly, in an ordinary way. Everything takes place nakedly, without padding. Pain and pleasure. We just see them very nakedly. And then he says this, I like this quote. Taking refuge in the Dharma means relating to everything that happens, from the splinter in your little finger to your granddad's committing suicide in your name. Wow. From the littlest to the biggest as part of that natural process, just facets of life. This is accomplished through study, but even more through meditation. That we are making what's the word? I can't think of the word. We're making an agreement, that's an agreement, a rapprochement, thank you, with our own minds, instead of constantly being caught up in wanting things to be different, which is so painful. That's the nature of samsara, that's the nature of dukkha, of suffering, is constantly wishing things were different and setting out to make them different, so that we're always living our lives in this forward lean of anxiety. Here's this: whatever goes on in our minds is a learning situation. All of it. That is the path. It is the only way. It is the only thing we can work on. And then finally, there's taking refuge in the Sangha as companionship. I remember once, I don't think I can recount this actually, but just a friend reminded me once, I was remembering an experience of insight, of awareness that I had had with my teacher, Trungpa Rinpoche. And I was remembering it, meaning I wasn't doing it. And this friend of mine, who's passed now, Polly, was listening to me talk, and she said, "Don't you think it's happening right now?" And she looked at me, and I went, doing. Yeah. So, really, that's what the Sangha means. We're able to act as helps and reminders to each other as we tread this path alone together. And because we're alone together, if someone trips, falls down, we can help them up. We're not leaning on each other. We can be helps for each other. And really what we're doing is providing reminders and feedback. He says the Sangha is the community of people who have the perfect right to cut through your trips and feed you with their wisdom. Boy, that's what she did probably years ago. Must be almost 50 years ago. As well as the perfect right to demonstrate their own neurosis and be seen through by you. It takes a lot of meditation practice and the ability to sort of rest in the present, to be able to not only tolerate the other person's neurosis, but not to react to it, not to attack, and to be able to take it when they come after you and stay open-minded and communicative in the present. And this is what the Sangha is. It's really, there are a lot of families who can't accomplish this. Close families, they split apart because they antagonize each other too much. Much less a group of people who come together to study the path. He says you're willing to work with your loneliness in a group. The Sangha is made up of thousands of people who are alone together, working together with their own loneliness, their own aloneness. Now, what accompanies this, as you take refuge, are three changes. The first is a change of attitude, which I've pretty much been describing, that one begins to develop a kind of open-mindedness and open-heartedness, a sympathy for oneself, especially starting with oneself. And that extends automatically to the world. The more kind you are to yourself, less critical, less self-judgmental, the more able you are to tolerate the imperfections in the people around you. And the more self-judgmental one is, the more critical one becomes of all of one's friends and relatives and lovers. And one's attitude changes from aggression to non-aggression and passionlessness. Because why? Because we're giving up the battle. Every time we come present, we are relaxing into this open space of awareness, and we're giving up the battle of self-improvement, of self-criticism. That battle is so pernicious, so pernicious. The battle of self-criticism, it can lead a person to kill themselves. It can take you all the way there. In coaching, I'm a coach. We talk to the client about their saboteur. their gremlin, their inner gremlin. And that is the voice inside you that is constantly saying, you can't succeed. You're going to fail at this. Don't go in there. Nobody's going to like you. Don't talk to that person. They won't appreciate you. If the saboteur has its way, it shuts you down completely. It takes away your self-confidence. It's constant self-criticism, negativity, pessimism. And the ultimate extension, the ultimate success of the saboteur is suicide. That's the ultimate suicide, the ultimate shutdown. So we're changing our attitude to first developing a sense of sympathy for ourselves and then extending that to others. How? When you sit and meditate, you start with the first thing. You sit there. Now, a beginner in meditation is thinking, I'm thinking all the time, I'm a lousy meditator. I'll never get anywhere with this. Later, you begin to realize it's just thought, and you can let it go, and you can come back to simple awareness. It might only, if you only do it once in a 30-minute sitting, that's successful meditation. That is meditation. That's what Organ Chowang is saying. That, the ability to stop being self-critical in meditation, is the key. It's the key to developing sympathy for oneself, that we don't have to be judgmental about our meditation practice or about ourselves, our states of mind. We can just see it and then come back as much as we can or can't. To give up that self-criticism. See, then you're giving up the struggle to be better, self-improvement tomorrow. Not to be as bad as I was yesterday. Giving up that journey. So it allows you to be friendly with yourself and with the rest of all sentient beings. And this way the teachings become a part of you. You don't become a religious person. Rather, these teachings, which are really beyond any kind of religiosity, they're about sanity. How to become sane and live a really ultimately sane life. And that's what we're doing here. He says you can be very friendly and gentle to yourself and other people and relate with the world, which seems to be the basic point of the Buddhist teachings. And meditation practice means you begin to pay more attention to the details of your daily life. And not only that, but more and more and more to be able to begin to see it as sacred. And sacred doesn't mean holy in some religiosity sense. What sacred means is completely worth being here for. That there's a kind of pleasure in the vividness of that street as you walk down. It could be a piece of dog shit in the street. It could be a beautiful flowering magnolia tree in the middle of the street, sidewalk or whatever. It doesn't matter. It's that quality of delight, of friendship, of appreciation for the vividness and beauty of this world as it arises in the present moment. The second change is change of mark, that you're beginning to show signs of the sanity that was already there in you all along. We just got lost. We got lost in thought, in dreams. I think... Bye, Abby. And so really what you're doing is you're beginning to become much saner. This is the change of mark, a gentleness and sympathy taking place. And finally, there's a change of name. You get a new name. And some people actually use their names. I mean, I have good friends who use their refuge names. There's Michael Cohen, who goes by Cherub now. Cherub means wisdom, prajna. And Chime Heller. Chime is, what is it? I think it's deathless. And there are other words. People use their names. So your name should act as a reminder, a kind of message connected with the practice of meditation. And it should if possible, show or capture some sense of your individual style, the way you present to the world, in your true nature, not in your neurotic nature. So the refuge vow and ceremony consists of basically, there's a little talk, but I've pretty much done it now. And then you do 3 prostrations. Anyone here who doesn't know what a prostration is? No, everybody knows, right? You throw yourself on the floor. You don't have to do that. You can just bend down and touch the floor, or you can even just sort of bow, depending on how infirm you are. I can't do full prostrations anymore. A little bit. And then you recite the refuge formula 3 times. And the refuge formula is: I take refuge in the Buddha, I take refuge in the Dharma, I take refuge in the Sangha. And you recite that 3 times. The prostrations are interesting. He says that they're willing to give in completely. That's what a prostration represents. To the choiceless sanity of the earth, and become a refugee in no man's land. In the land of loneliness and aloneness. And the sanity of the earth. You're giving in to that, which only lives in the present moment. He talked a lot about the sanity of earth in a lot of contexts. So you prostrate to the shrine, which represents the heritage, the lineage of all these people who've passed it down over the years. And there are some really colorful stories. These people, if you start reading the stories of the lineage figures, you begin to develop a real affection for them, and sort of wish you could meet them. Some of them are so wild and crazy and delightful. And you also are prostrating to the preceptor, who is the inheritor of this lineage, and who embodies it in front of you, to whatever extent he or she can. And he says it's more than a ritual. You are being infected with the commitment to the Buddha Dharma. Buddhism is being transmitted into your system. It's very physical. And the 3rd time you say, I take refuge in the Sangha, the preceptor snaps his or her fingers. And at that moment, the real transmission happens. It enters your system and you become part of the lineage. And he says, at that moment, the sperm, so to speak, enters your system and you become part of the lineage. And then I'm just going to read this last paragraph here from his essay. From that moment onward, you are a follower of the practicing lineage of the Kagyu. Now, the Kagyu is one of the 4 main sects of Tibetan Buddhism. And it started in the 11th century AD in Tibet. Buddhism had gone to Tibet in the 8th century AD, and the lineage that came from that time is called the Nyingma lineage, of which we are also a part here. Nyingma lineage. In fact, on the shrine, that gentleman is Nyingma. Rinpoche is Kagyu and Nyingma. And these 2 gentlemen over here are both Kagyu. And Ponlop Rinpoche here, I think, is both. I'm not sure. The Kagyus and the Nyingmas liked each other a lot because they were both emphasizing practice much more than study. So the Kagyu lineage actually means the lineage of the word which is passed down from teacher to student. Ka is word, and Gyu means lineage or continuity. And he says, from that moment onward, you are a follower of the practicing lineage of the Kagyu. At that particular point, the energy, the power, and the blessing of basic sanity that has existed in the lineage for 2,500 years, this was written a while back, in an unbroken tradition and discipline from the time of the Buddha, enters your system, and you finally become a full-fledged follower of the Buddha Dharma. You are a future living Buddha at that point. And the thing they realize is that this Buddhahood that you are tapping into is not something that you create. It's already there. It's already there in all of us. It's what's called Buddha nature. It's our true nature. It's just that we've fallen asleep and sort of forgotten about it. We've gotten distracted. We've given our loyalty to the dreams of the past and the future. And so that we've lost touch with our Buddha nature, our awake nature. So that's all I have to say. And we can have a discussion if you like, if you have anything to contribute.
There's a mic here.
It's not necessarily something to contribute, but can you repeat again from the reading about the comparison of the splinter in your finger to your grandfather committing suicide in your name?
Yeah, that was quite a powerful little paragraph, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Taking refuge in the Dharma means relating to everything that happens. Everything that happens. You don't walk out of that music store like I got to get away from this. You relate to it. I mean, maybe you do walk out at some point, but you don't just blow it off. You relate to everything that happens, from the splinter in your little finger to your granddad's committing suicide in your name. From the littlest to the biggest, as part of that natural process, just facets of life. That's a funny choice, isn't it, that last one?
Thank you.
What do you make of that?
I'm processing it, as I say.
I mean, can you imagine the guilt a person might feel if their grandfather committed suicide because of that person, because of me, my actions, my lack of whatever, or my positive, whatever I've done or haven't done, the guilt and the pain. And he's saying, whether it's a splinter in your little finger, how does he put it, or that horrific. Means relating to everything that happens as part of the natural process, just facets of life. Everything. That's fierce, I think. What a challenge for us. And also, how liberating. It's freeing us from accepting and rejecting, from judgment, from the judgments, from guilt, from shame, all of that stuff. From blame.
It's being present with it without blame.
Being present. And that doesn't mean blowing it off. You still are interested in it. You want to understand it. You want to be there with it. But the whole thing of blame is, I remember I had this friend, he was a brilliant psychoanalyst and group therapist, really amazing human being. He's dead now. And he said to me, do you know how you spell blame, John? And I said, how? He said, S-H-I-T. Yeah, his name was Lou Ormont. He was something. He really was something. S-H-I-T. Yeah. And there's this line from the Sadhana of Mahamudra, which we've done here and we'll do again. That's Trungpa Rinpoche's Dharma. I ate one of many Dharma that he produced. And it goes, good and bad, happy and sad, all thoughts vanish into emptiness, like the imprint of a bird in the sky. Really, that's what this is all about. Coming present, being here for all of it. with curiosity, with complete, accurate responsiveness, with open-heartedness, with love, with compassion. This is what the refuge ceremony is. It's a doorway into,
It's so opposite of like being raised.
Opposite of what?
It's so opposite of being a recovering Catholic. I was raised a Catholic and born into guilt.
You raised a Catholic what?
I was raised Catholic. In Catholic Church, you're born into guilt. If you're not baptized, you can never go to heaven.
Yeah.
Because you're born into guilt.
And the idea of original sin.
Original sin.
I mean, we're damned from birth. We're born in sin. And I'll tell you, Trungpa Rinpoche said, this is one of my favorite slogans. Self-confidence is the, not self-confidence, how did he put it? Wait a second. Self-doubt is the Buddhist version of original sin. And that's not just a throwaway. There's a lot of teaching in that. Because when one doubts oneself, first of all, you are aware of yourself, you're looking at yourself and thinking, how am I doing? And you want yourself to be better, and you're doubting yourself, and you think, I'm not doing as well as I should be, right? So there's a lot of ego in self-doubt. And then it's very attacking. It's attacking using other standards. I'm not good enough. I'm not living up to these standards that I've been taught. That's the saboteur again. That's the gremlin working. And when you give up self-doubt completely, then that's complete confidence. A confidence that isn't like beating your chest confidence. It's a confidence that's completely silent. It's just utterly being here without self-doubt. It's easy, it's free, it's open, without self-reference.
I'm just took note of that. I think I want that like printed and framed.
Yes, maybe on the refrigerator or
Yeah.
on your bathroom mirror or
Or
someplace.
something beautifully written and hung up.
Self-doubt is the Buddhist version of original sin.
Yeah.
Isn't that a beauty?
I wish I would have heard that.
Huh?
I wish I would have heard that 50 years ago.
Don't we all? And then I'll tell you what, I will bring in a text. Right here. There is a marvelous expression of this. Rinpoche received many terma. Trungpa Rinpoche. You know what terma are? Anybody here not know what terma are? Everybody knows. You don't know what terma are? There are basically two kinds of teachings. Kama and terma. Kama means words. Words are passed down from one generation to the next. They're like the Buddhist teachings, the Buddhist sutras. And because, of that, they're called the long transmission. And they're subject to corruption. Terma, on the other hand, are not passed down from generation to the next. What happens is the classic terma, in fact most terma, spring from Padmasambhava. Is that him up there? No, it isn't. I don't know if we have a talk of him. And Padmasambhava was the fellow who brought Buddhism to Tibet. And he knew that there were many teachings that he had which were inappropriate for the people of the time, but which would be appropriate for people in the future. So he hid those teachings, knowing when and by whom they would be discovered in the future. Those are terma. Terma literally means treasures, hidden treasures. And there are two kinds of terma, what are called earth terma and mind terma. Earth terma are physical objects that have been hidden somewhere, sometimes in solid rock. And the terton magically reaches into the solid rock and pulls the object out. And the object can be a text embodying the teachings. It could be a statue. It could be anything. But when the terton, the discoverer, the terton is the person who finds the terma, discovers it, the teachings immediately flow into them. And they need to write them down because they won't last. Mind terma come through space. And Trungpa Rinpoche received both kinds of terma. And mind terma, though, come through space, and when a person knows that they're about to receive a Gonter, it's called meditation Dharma, they sit down and they take pen and paper. And with Rinpoche, I was never there when he received one, but I have friends who were. They said it looked like automatic writing, just writing like this. There's the Shambhala teachings are Terma, most of them. I mean, a lot of them. They come from texts that he received, and they were mostly mind Terma, although now there are people coming from Tibet, Karma Senge Rinpoche, who have brought physical Terma that Rinpoche found when he was in Tibet. And the Nalanda Translation Committee is translating those things. So there's a book that you can read, if you haven't already, called Shambhala, The Sacred Path of the Warrior. In the very beginning of that book, there you'll see on the left-hand page, is a few pages in, there's Tibetan, and on the right-hand page it's the translation into English. This is Terma, and it comes from a text that you are not allowed to receive or own until you go through particular trainings. But Rinpoche gave permission for this, just this one page, which is pretty much the introductory page, to be printed in this book, which you can buy online. And it's really beautiful. You can always spot Terma if you look, that because any printing of Terma, whether it's Tibetan or English, will have a little symbol at the end of each line. The symbol is a small horizontal line with a circle above and a circle below it. And that indicates that that line is Terma. And the thing about Terma is, because they are received hundreds and hundreds of years after they were originally taught or produced, there's very little chance of corruption, much less. Because they're not being handed down from one person to the next over the centuries. And that's called the short lineage. And there are many, many Terma, especially the Nyingma lineage, the old lineage. Khyentse Rinpoche. He was a great Teratan. Lots and lots of Terma. Right. So we have it in our lineage. And you can read that chat page. And what it says, that page is really beautiful. What it's all about is about confidence and self-doubt. And basically what it says is that when you're trapped in self-doubt, lack of confidence, you become a criminal. Because you're constantly trying to arrange the world to bolster your sense of well-being. Because you don't trust it. You don't believe in it. You think there's something wrong with me and my circumstances. But when you have the confidence, then you become ever generous, kind. You produce the people who are confident, have this confidence. They build beautiful castles, and they sow, plains of wheat and barley and fruit, and they are ever kind and generous to each other. Because why? Because they're not riven with poverty mentality. The poverty mentality of, I'm not good enough. My life isn't good enough. And that's really what this whole path is about too. The path of taking refuge is about generating that kind of confidence, richness, wealth, becoming a Buddha. So if you've got that book, maybe it's in the back there and we can find out when we break and we can take a look at it. It's a beautiful passage. Any other comments?
The poverty mentality, would that be considered like the same thing as successful people in life feeling like a fraud? Like Anthony Bourdain?
Bourdain.
Would that be poverty mentality? Even though he did accomplish these things?
Yeah, poverty mentality, you don't have to be radically successful to have a poverty mentality.
But can you be radically successful?
Oh, yeah,
poverty mentality?
absolutely.
Yeah.
Because there's never enough.
Yeah.
You're poor. You have a poverty mentality.
All right. Yeah, but that sounds like something different, because that sounds like something like he wasn't deserving of all that.
That's poverty mentality too.
Yeah.
To not be deserving.
Yeah.
Also, if you they flip that over, and if you think, oh, I deserve all this praise and stuff, something's fishy there too.
Yeah.
So in the readings, and you mentioned it also, they talk about taking refuge as being a final decision, and then I think it said something like...
I'm having trouble hearing you, sorry.
You're having trouble hearing me? Is this better?
Yeah,
Okay. So you mentioned, and in the readings as well, it talked about taking refuge as being a final decision, and I think it said something like, once you take refuge, you can never say you're not a Buddhist, right? Before you take it, you can say you're a Buddhist or you're not a Buddhist, but afterwards you always have to say you're a Buddhist, right?
Well, there's nobody who's going to punish you.
No. I know. That's not my question. My question is, and also that you stop shopping, et cetera, right? But for people who have, say, come up in a certain religion, like Joe was talking about, being Catholic, how do people sort of balance or square, the Buddhist teachings and what they might have, or they might still hold on to in a formal religious setting?
There's a school of thought within our Sangha too, and sort of, I never understood this, that said that you can stay a Catholic, or a theist of one kind or another, Jew, doesn't matter, and still be a Buddhist. But I don't see it, because Buddhism is fundamentally non-theistic. Take that whole thing about the Buddha, who he was. He wasn't a savior. He wasn't Jesus Christ. He wasn't Yahweh, Jehovah. It wasn't that he was wholly divine, better than us. He represents someone who found the ultimate humanity in him, and we can do that too. In fact, according to the Dzogchen teachings, Dzogchen, is the great perfection teachings. That's the highest of the Buddhist teachings. All sentient beings, from the lowest microbe to the most evolved forms, are moving inexorably towards enlightenment, and will achieve enlightenment. And in this life, there's no telling how fast or how slowly any one person in this room or anywhere will achieve it. It depends on your past karma and your past training, which none of us can remember. But nonetheless, sets a predilection in us. The very fact that you're here listening to this and wanting to take refuge, that's your karma.
Yeah, to me personally, the two seem very different. Buddhism and religion, in a formal sense, like Judaism or being Catholic, seem entirely different. So I could see I could see how people could theoretically, find inspiration in both, right, without conflict.
Yes.
But I know that it feels like sometimes people conflate Buddhism with religion. So just kind of curious,
Well, Buddhism is a very funny kind of religion, but I have friends, for instance. I have a very close friend who is a really committed Buddhist practitioner. He's doing tantric practice, does a lot. And at the same time, he is a very committed Jew, and studies the Kabbalah with his Rebbe, and he doesn't find a contradiction. So there is a mystic version of Judaism, which evidently, I haven't studied the Kabbalah, but which evidently is in harmony with Buddhism. And certainly there have been Christian mystics, both ancient and modern. There have been a number that showed up around Europa in the 70s, who, again, find, there's a dialogue between Buddhism and Christianity at some level when you get into mystical Christianity. Now, mystical makes it sound very woo-woo, but really what we're talking about is some version of non-dualism, transcending I and other. That is what is essential in Buddhism. And that's when a theistic religion can begin to do that, transcending I and other, that kind of duality. then it begins to speak the language of Buddhism, but with a different vocabulary.
I have another question.
Huh?
I have a question about Sangha. So when we talk about Sangha, are we talking about, like, for example, just like this group here, like New
Yeah.
York Buddha Dharma, or is it some broader community of Buddhists?
Well, both. But our immediate Sangha is this, you know. But, you know, you can, if you join, for instance, Westchester Buddhist Center, or go up there for that, I'm a teacher up there. And so the lineage that you're, you know, going, which is from me into the people behind me, you can participate that in Westchester. Or if you happen to go out to Boulder, Colorado, where there's a gazillion Buddhists like me, right? All my friends live out there, still, a lot of them. Or up to Halifax, Nova Scotia, where I've got so many friends who are students of Trungpa Rinpoche. You become part of that Sangha because you're entering the lineage of that went from me, right, to Trungpa Rinpoche, because I was his student, and then from him to all the teachers beyond him. So yeah, that's the Sangha. Yeah, and you could say, if you went up to Nova Scotia and you met some of my friends up there, you could say, yeah, I'm in the lineage of the Kagyu lineage of Trungpa Rinpoche, most recently. That lineage. That doesn't mean you're sort of worshiping Trungpa Rinpoche. It just means that that's sort of been the line through which the teachings came past. He always said of himself, by the way, because people, you see, but when he first showed up, there were no Tibetan teachers like him. In fact, the title Rinpoche is a title. All High Lamas are called Rinpoches. Everyone on this shrine you would address as Rinpoche, including Paul over there. Here. All of them. And yet, I don't know, what was my point? I'm sorry. Lost it. I forgot. Maybe it'll come back. Oh, High Lamas. Oh, I know. When he came here, and we called him Rinpoche, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, I guess some part of me must have known that it was a title. But for us, it was just his name. It's like, hi, Rich. Hello, Rinpoche. Like that. Even though maybe intellectually, but we didn't know any other Rinpoches. And so he made it clear the teachings weren't coming from him. He said, and this is a quote, he said, I am passing on the power of the lineage. It's coming through me to you. The power of the lineage. That's what he regarded. He regarded himself as a conduit. He said that many times.
I have two comments. Firstly, regarding to practicing Buddhism as well as the religion that one grew up with, I'm reminded of something I heard Chatral Rinpoche say. He said that all religions and all spiritual paths are like the radii on a circle, moving out from the circle towards the center. And the closer you get towards the center, the more in common you see. But when you first start out by the circle, they seem vastly different. And then
Let's stop with that for a second.
Okay.
Chatral Rinpoche, by the way, was a great Dzogchen master. He's passed just in the last few years. I had friends who studied with him in Nepal. At the time before his passing, he was regarded as the greatest of all the Dzogchen teachers, great perfection teachers. I'll tell you another story about that same point. In about 1971, two people came to visit Trungpa Rinpoche. I was in the room. A guy named Ken Green and Tom Rich. Tom Rich, they were both students of Swami Satchidananda. And they came to visit Trungpa Rinpoche, and they were dressed all in whites, barefooted, long hair, beads, the whole thing. And they both eventually became students of Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, and Tom Rich became Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche's closest student, his heir. Okay, but at the time they were just coming as a representative, as ambassadors, or from Swami Satchidananda, what was happening was that there was going to be, they told Trungpa Rinpoche, there's going to be a spiritual version of Woodstock. We're going to have a spiritual Woodstock. It's going to take place in the Pacific Northwest. Woodstock had already happened in, so I think it was 68 or 9. And this is like 1971 now. And we're sitting in the living room. Rinpoche's in a chair, and they're standing, or I think, in front of him. And they invited him to come to this spiritual Woodstock. He politely declined. He said, you had other commitments, blah, blah, blah. And they left. Afterwards, he'd expressed a profound distaste. Oh, and they told him the theme of the spiritual Woodstock was that while religions may appear different, in the end, they all go to the same place. After they left, he expressed a profound distaste with that idea in this way. And you can take it, they're two sides of the coin. Remember, Chogyal Rinpoche was a great teacher. He said that it's so focused, that idea, on the goal, that all religions are going to get to the same place. He said, what's necessary is that you appreciate the path and don't worry about the goal. He said, the goal doesn't matter. He said, each path is very different because they arise in a particular time and place and are suitable for different people because of their inclinations. And he said, and they're beautiful, each path, and should be appreciated. And he said, the focus on the fact that they all get to the same place in the end, which was the theme of the spiritual Woodstock, he found distasteful. It's spiritually materialistic, crass, So he didn't want to go, and he didn't go. Yogi Bhajan, Swami Satchidananda, the Satguru, all these people, were going there. A lot of Hindus and other Buddhists too. But I'm sorry, go ahead, next.
Yeah, I can see that. And the other comment I had was regarding the paragraph that Joe is asking about. It seems to me that Trungpa Rinpoche was not only talking about taking refuge in the Buddha Dharma, but taking refuge in Dharma as phenomena, as seeing all experience, everything arising in the mind as an opportunity for practice.
Bravo. Absolutely. That's when you take refuge in the Dharma, especially that's where he put that idea. Yeah. Yes. Every situation is an opportunity for practice, no matter how painful. In fact, the more painful, the greater the opportunity to deepen your practice. Hoi. Spoken as a New York Buddhist. Hoi. Well, if there are no more comments, thanks. It was a really great discussion. And I'm really looking forward to this. We're going to have 4 refugees, 3 of whom are here in this room, and 1 who's going to be joining us as well. And then we're going to do Bodhisattva vows as well on the same night. And I think we've got 4 people taking Bodhisattva vows. And next week, I think, I'm not sure if next week is, it's either Rochelle giving a talk or I'm giving a talk on Bodhisattva vows. And then, yeah.
So next week would be the preparation for the Bodhisattva.
Right. Right.
And as far as schedule?
Didn't I send out the chapter? Did I send out the chapter?
You said as well as.
I hope I sent out the chapter from, I didn't bring it with me.
Maybe I misread it.
Maybe I'll check. Huh?
Did you send to everyone or just the people?
Just the Bodhisattva people who are going to be Bodhisattvaized.
I'll check.
Okay, well, would you let me know if you don't have it? Thank you. And I'll definitely get it out to you pronto. It's wonderful that you're going to do that, take the Bodhisattva vow. It's really beautiful. Yeah. Yeah, and once you've taken Bodhisattva vows, Then you're a candidate for entering the path of Tantra with the 100,000 prostrations, 100,000 recitations of the 100-syllable mantra of Vajrasattva, 100,000 mandala offerings, and 100,000 Guru Yoga practices.
So we get this, that enables us to see certain readings?
That'll come later. But and also there are physical passes. There are passes for people with physical issues when you come to the prostrations. There's nobody in this room who's so young that it's going to be easy to do 100,000 prostrations. I did them when I was like in my 20s, and and then later. But I'll tell you, there's a great teacher. In fact, in the Bodhisattva book, I sent out the Bodhisattva book, didn't I? The whole book? The Refuge book? I sent that Refuge. Yeah, the last chapter. I haven't actually read it, the last chapter, but it's by Patrul Rinpoche. And I'm a big fan of Patrul Rinpoche's. You may not like him. Patrul Rinpoche is fire and brimstone Buddhism. He really is. This is a guy who lived, I think, in the 1700s. And he traveled around Tibet like a beggar. And he was a great teacher and highly respected. And there are stories like this one about him. That this is one of the great lineage figures, you know. He's Nyingma, by the way. And the reason I'm mentioning him and he comes to mind is he did the Nundra, which I just described, 100,000 prostrations, you know, Vajrasattva mantra, mandala offering, and Guru Yoga, something like 60 some odd times in his life. Just did it over and over and over again. So it's not like you do it and then you get, you know, and then it's over, although for me it sure was. But there's a story about him that he's traveling, he's been invited to go teach at a monastery. And he's traveling across the plains, heading towards this monastery, and he finds this woman traveling as well with two small children, and she's struggling, you know. They don't know enough to eat, and she's trying to carry them and cook, and so he helps her. And he shares his food with them, and he helps carry the kids, and blah, blah, blah. And they finally get to the monastery, and she has no idea who he is. You know, he just looks like a beggar. And they get to the front door of the monastery, and she says, I hope you won't, think I'm out of line or something, whatever she says in the Tibetan style, but you were so kind, would you consider marrying me? And he politely declines, and he says, but I'll tell you what, come on in with me into this monastery, and we'll see if we can do something for you. So the next day, he's teaching. And he's up on the teacher's throne, they elevate him up, and all the monks are seated and listening to him. And she comes in and she's sitting at the back and she realizes who he is, that he's this great teacher. And she's mortified. And at the end of the teaching, they come up with the teacher's gift. That's what always takes place at the end of a teaching. They come up with a gift. They give it to the teacher. And he takes the gift in his hands, stands up, walks down through the monks, hands it to the woman, and leaves and starts wandering out across the plains of Tibet again. That's classic Patrul Rinpoche. He's just fierce, And his teachings were beautiful, but they were really, really... and then his great work, the classic text. In every sect, there's a text called the Lam Rim text, Stages of the Path text. And it's sort of laying out the stages of the path up to Tantra, pretty much, and into Tantra, beginning. And for the Nyingmas, it's his book, and it's called The Words of My Perfect Teacher. Oh, so beautiful. It's not his words. It's the words of his perfect teacher, that he's transmitting to us. So humble and modest. And it's a classic, The Words of My Perfect Teacher. It's beautiful. But fierce. He describes all 18 hells in really great detail and with relish. And all kinds of stuff like that. All right, we should end. So let's do the dedication of merit. Anybody need the text? Can we just sort of... Luke, can you get it? in that plastic container.
Is this a series of pages that's stapled on the back?
It's in a folder marked texts, I think.
There's a whole bunch of folks.
Okay, look at what I encourage you to fake it. And those of us who did.
There's
Yeah.
about 10 folders, I don't know which one it is. So I believe it's figured.
But after you take refuge, then really, and whenever you practice, you should start your day with the refuge formula. Before you, as you sit down to practice, you chant, the taking refuge. And you do it 3 times. And you can, if you wish, take the Bodhisattva vow as well. And then at the end of the practice, you say do the dedication of merit. This is especially true for the Bodhisattvas. Refugees can do it as well, but it's not so much required. But it is the taking refuge is a very good thing to do at the beginning of your practice. So here we go.
By this merit, may all attain omniscience, may it defeat the enemy wrongdoing, from the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may I free all beings. By the confidence of the golden sun of the great east, may the lotus garden of Rigden's wisdom bloom. May the dark ignorance of sentient beings be dispelled. May all beings enjoy profound, brilliant glory.
You see what you do is you start out in Anjali. You turn it off.
It's still on.
Oh. You start out in Anjali for that. And you by this merit. And then you put your hands down and say, by the confidence of the golden sun of the great east. And you're doing a Shambhala, dedication of merit. And so this is the warrior posture, and this is a warrior bow of recognition to each other.